Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Marc Andreessen and Rob Henderson, and we are to talk about the Deadwood movie, in addition to the entire series of Deadwood and sort of the real life Deadwood and what we think about all of it. Let's start with because by the time this comes out, people will have heard three and a half, 4 hours of me and Rob talking about the Deadwood series, but not Marc. So, Marc, give us your general view of sort of Deadwood, and then did you recently saw the movie, right? And so, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I watched the movie last night. I watched the entire series when it aired, and then I've been holding the movie for a special occasion. And of course, what better special occasion than this discussion? So, I mean, yeah. So look, Deadwood's been my favorite, basically work of American fiction of the last, basically since it came out. And I completely seriously refer to it as sort of the closest that we're going to get to Shakespeare. I actually had the chance, by the way. I spent an afternoon with David Milch several years back, and let me just say the experience was every bit. He fully in person lives up to what you see in the show. Yeah, I'm just a huge fan. I mean, look, it may be obvious. I'm sure you guys have talked about it. It is the story of the American frontier. It is the story of America. I mean, for me, it's like way more the story of America than The Godfather or anything like that. It's this extraordinary rendition. I'll just highlight a couple things I really like about it. One is, it shows, I mean, it's hard for any of us, I think, to conceptualize this, but at least more than anything else I've seen, like it shows the mud, right? Like it shows the physical degradation, of what it must have been like. And they recreated it for the movie. I was happy to see as everybody's like clomping around in this just disgusting mud all the time. And of course, everybody's like dressed completely to the nines, like every step, to the extent that anybody can possibly muster any dignity in the form of their dress and manners. They do that because everything otherwise is just like mud and shit, and pigs, just disgusting stuff. And so they really show like the level of just like physical effort that went into that. They obviously show the danger. They obviously the story is the story of the show is the sort of carving out of civilization from basically wildness, and that's great. I've always been very fond of the Hearst character. I was when the show first ran. I don't know whether this is controversial for you guys. I think Hearst obviously is the hero of the show, right? Like he's obviously the good guy. He's obviously completely correct in everything he says. The movie really makes that clear, and it's great to see. He maybe is not exactly like he was in real life, but it's great to see that kind of will to power fully expressed on screen, even if Mills probably felt the need to dirty him up a little bit.
Yeah, when Richard and I talked last time, Richard gave a sort of semi-defense of Hearst, that he represented the future of technology, of capitalism, of advancement, and that the only reason we felt any sympathy, Richard, do you want to? We said that the only reason we felt any sympathy for Al and Deadwood is because we had this parochial conservative views, and we have this outsider coming in and trying to take it over and throwing his money around. And
yeah, it was. I mean, objectively, what was Deadwood? It was basically a town that revolved around two pimps and their prostitutes.
Two monogamous pimps.
Arguably monogamous, pimps. If I could talk to David Milch, that'd be the one thing I ask him, whether there was any relevance of that or whether it was just a time thing. They could only hang out with one woman at a time. But yeah, you have these monogamous pimps who are running in the town, and it's just there's no families there. When they open up the school, there's like 5 kids. They're all shooting each other and lying and stealing from each other, and trying to make a living. But I mean, it's not by any objective measure something that is it's cool. I mean, it's cool. It's fun to watch. We'll watch a show about it 140 years later. But whether it's good for civilization or not, probably not. And so Hearst is the guy who's going to come and he's going to make this into something. Is going to make this into something important. Something like real civilization. And Hearst is, and I don't know, maybe Marc sympathizes with Hearst. I sympathize with Swearengen and Bullock in the city. Like I think, most people do. Although rationally, I know, like if I was a policymaker or something, I'd probably, listen to Hearst more than Swearengen if I wanted to, to sort of maximize the value of the land or just, maximize the greater good or whatever. But the idea of the show is, when we talked about, we said this is like late 1990s, mid 2000s liberalism, when it came out. If you watch the Cars movie, I once said on Twitter, the Cars movie, every Cars movie is like normie liberalism of the time. So the early 2000s car movie. You guys both seen the Cars movies?
I've not seen any of that. This is like the Pixar. Like the
So
this is a genre shift happening in real time.
Yeah. So 2000s car movie, the first Cars one is like there's one like left behind town, like a Rust Belt town of cars. And they're getting left behind by like big business or whatever. This is Deadwood, right? It's the agglomeration of capital, right? So it's like 2013 or 2014. Cars movie is about global warming. It's like somebody invents a new thing to not use gasoline anymore, and there's a big evil business. And then like 2019, I don't know, I'm getting the years maybe a few years off. But the third Cars movie is just basically like female. They start to introduce female cars, and one of them becomes like one of the stars of the movie. So it's just like small town, like big anti-capitalism to global warming to feminism. And I don't know if they're going to do a black Cars matter or something in the future, but they've never done that. And so this is what I think Deadwood was in, like the Cars 1 era.
These are the categories in your mind when you watch a movie. This is a Cars 2 movie. You're watching some movie from 2003. So what Cars movie we're out there? Okay.
Yeah. And so this is what this is. And obviously you're not supposed to like Hearst. Now I agree with Mark, because Mark is a capitalist and I'm a capitalist, and we like civilization and advancement, but I don't think you're supposed to. I think you're supposed to hate Hearst. I think you're supposed to think he's, the representative of everything wrong in the world. And it gives him his due a little bit. Like it gives him these monologues where he sort of lays down the truth for you. But I don't think you're supposed to like him.
But of course you're not supposed. But I mean, it's Hollywood. Like, of course you're not supposed to like him. Like David Milch is an old school liberal, and of course you're not supposed to like him. He does this thing. Maybe the little maybe his show's a little bit more Christopher Lash than it is kind of normally liberal, just in the sense of like it does valorize these kind of traditional values. This kind of this traditional sense of law and order, this traditional sense of family, this traditional sense of community. But look, I mean, the reason I'm obviously right is because sitting here today, we live in Hearst's world, not in Bullock and Swearengen's world. And by the way, we're very happy that we do. Of course, we take it totally for granted, but we do. If we could trade and live in, Bullock and Swearengen's world, none of us would do that. That would be awful. And so, it is. And this is part of the epic, right? This is part of the epic, the story of the Old West, and the best Westerns kind of always show this, which is like, it's a vanishing life, right? Because it's being overrun by civilization. It's chaos being overrun by order. It gets painted in a romantic light, and the forces of order, end up looking evil as usual. But like, nevertheless, like, that happened. It's good for us that happened. It's that in fact is progress. I've been reading. I'm reading a lot of Nick Land, who's suddenly become super relevant because of all the AI kind of stuff that's happening in the industry right now. So trying to spin up on kind of all the people who thought about this. And Hearst is like the a monster straight out of Nick Land, right? He's like the engine of techno-capitalism, right? And it's like, yeah, he's the engine of techno-capitalism. Like, he's the guy who's going to bring you, he brings you the telephone, and then he's going to bring you running water, and then he's going to bring you central heating, and he's going to bring you antibiotics, and he's going to bring you telecommuting, and he's going to bring you right, like all of the things. He's going to bring you podcasting, right? He's going to bring you all the things that make modern life worthwhile. So obviously the hero.
Yeah, we see the technological advancement. So in the series, we saw the telegraph come in, and Richard and I talked about this, about Swearengen making some unkind remarks about this new technology coming in, and how have you ever received good news from a telegram, something like that. And then in the movie, we see the telephones being installed, and you see EB struggling to use the telephone and shouting into the receiver. And I mean, one thing that I thought was interesting about the movie is that the movie, I mean, it was basically the series finale redone in a more sort of audience-pleasing way. But in the series finale, it was, I mean, basically like Swearengen, I thought was the primary protagonist of the series, and Bullock was maybe like a secondary sort of supporting protagonist character. Whereas in the movie, it was Bullock who seemed to be the protagonist more so than Swearengen. Swearengen had aged quite a bit. He was ill. I think at the end, did he? I mean, we're giving away the spoilers, I guess, but he died, right? He died at the end. Was my understanding.
No, I thought he told God to F off. He was like, he's like, our Father who art in heaven. He's like, let him stay there. So I think the idea was, he's going to stick around for a few more years.
Is that okay? I kind of got the opposite impression. It was like he's like this is the fading sun for Swearengen, where he's sort of on his way out. Maybe he didn't necessarily die on screen, but he was clearly unwell. But so Swearengen failed to stop Hearst in the series finale, right? And at the end of season 3, Hearst rides off in his carriage, and yeah, we agreed that was kind of a satisfying ending for the series. That of course, like, Hearst is going to get away with this. Like, he cuts off Swearengen's finger, gets away with it, but then in the movie he doesn't, and I found that interesting. Bullock was the hero of that.
Sure he does. Hearst totally gets away with it. He's going to get right out of jail. Like,
well, yeah. Well, it was more sort of like the ending wasn't like him riding off in a carriage, right? He was physically beaten and imprisoned at the end, and that's the last we see of him.
I know, but I interpreted that as like the last gasp. I mean, that was like Bullock. That was like Bullock's death. Like, that's the last thing he could do to Hearst. Hearst gets sprung the next day. Hearst wins.
Yeah. Okay.
It was the last twinkle of the romantic West. Was Bullock able to put Hearst in prison? Like that after the day after that world was over.
Yeah.
Well, but Bullock also is a gentleman, right? He could have let him kill. He could have let them kill him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He stops them. So it's the chivalry of the Old West and the rough justice, but not too rough of justice, because he doesn't let them kill him. Bullock is also a harbinger. I mean, he's also a bringer of civilization. Right, Bullock in the series.
Swearengen would have let Hearst die in that moment, right?
He's a bringer of traditionalism. This is my last reference. He's a bringer of traditionalism. He's not a bringer of modernity, right? That's the difference. That's the point I'm making. Like, Bullock's view of order is the old view of order. To your point on chivalry, Hearst's view of order is the new view of order, right? Which is what's created our world, and like, clearly that be one. And by the way, sitting here today, in Hearst's view of modernity, like, Hearst do not go to jail, and we're sitting here today with plenty of people in public life who demonstrate that every single day.
So then in this case, would Swearengen be? So would he represent like sort of ordered chaos, or just sort of outside of the confines of okay, so like big man kind of. So that is like really like old school traditional societies, like pre-agricultural revolution societies.
Yeah. Bullock's connection with Sol Star is interesting, right? Because that's also sort of a step in civilization. The Jews come in and they do banking and they do business stuff, and then this guy has laws, and then Hearst is the agglomeration of capital, right? And Swearengen is old style big man society. So yeah, you have these 3 things, right? And they're sort of stages in civilization, and each one sort of heralds the other, right? Swearengen gets Bullock to be the sheriff. Bullock, saves Hearst's life, and probably there probably isn't enough order for Hearst to come in and do all the things he does if there isn't some kind of law enforcement. So yeah, you do have this sort of progress of civilization here,
right? And and they do this somewhat reluctantly, I think, right? Like Swearengen initially, like, there was a rivalry between Bullock and Swearengen in season 1. They didn't like each other. That was the sort of the one of the key conflicts of season 1 is this is the sort of conflict set up between Swearengen and Bullock, and then eventually Swearengen and Bullock become allies. They come around, and then in the end of the movie, after Hearst has been in conflict with the other two, with Bullock and with Swearengen, Bullock reluctantly saves him. So yeah, this is like, it's not an easy process. Like, this sort of like a Hegelian dialectical, like the conflict, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Like, it's not an easy process, this evolution. But yeah, I could see that. That's an interesting interpretation.
Well, so I think that Bullock, just the look on Bullock's face when he was, at least, considering letting Hearst get killed by the mob, right? I don't think it was. I mean, the simple way of looking at that was, sort of order versus chaos in the moment. Mob justice versus the force of rule. The other way of looking at it is that Bullock knew full well that if he arrested Hearst, threw him in jail, it wouldn't stick. It wouldn't last. A rural whatever sheriff, marshal, whatever is not going to lock up a U.S. senator, and it's not going to stick. And so he knew the only actual true justice left was actually justice by mob, and he still couldn't stomach it. But he knew he wasn't. He knew he wasn't going to get actual justice.
One thing that the series and the movie did in both cases, in which a character is about to do something that they may later regret or something, commit some kind of transgression. So in the series, remember the fight between Swearengen and Bullock. Swearengen is about to pull out his knife, right? Like he said he didn't have a knife. He ended up, of course, having a knife, and he was about to kill Bullock. And then he sees Bullock's wife and child, and then he decides not to kill him. And then in the scene where the mob is beating Hearst, Bullock looks up and sees again his own wife and his child, and decides to save Hearst from the mob. Is there any significance there that in both cases, they're sort of being they're being exposed or revealed somehow to a woman and to children, and this sort of activates like some sort of higher conscience within them?
Did Bullock see the wife and
Martha was sort of she had the children, and she was sort of scurrying away with them as the mob was beating her.
See them. I remember that. Okay.
I think so.
And it's kind of ambiguous whether that was the reason, but that was that scene I think was in there for a reason. I think that there maybe Milch maybe had something in mind with both of those scenes with these two sort of men who are being sort of gazed upon by this woman, same woman too in both cases, which I found interesting.
The sort of civilizing effect. Well, but you find this in the series and too when like the women are introducing the school, right? And it's even Calamity Jane gets involved in that, and Jodie, and Bullock's wife Martha, right? All the women are basically going, this wouldn't have been this was also 2000s liberal thing. I mean, the women would have had to become cowboys or something if this was modern liberalism, but no,
Calamity Jane kind of she saved Bullock, right? Calamity Jane at the end.
She does do some things, right? You're right, but still, she's like also healthcare too. The women do a lot of healthcare stuff. They go to Jodie's place when they want to recover. Like why she doesn't have any healthcare expertise. It's just division of labor. Women are doing healthcare stuff, and they're doing education stuff. And like everyone sort of has a soft spot for the school. Like it's considered sort of like a good thing, like in the entire town. And so there's like this idea of like women and children sort of soften civilization, right?
Yeah, but it was honest.
I've always felt the problem with these frontier communities is that they didn't read enough Andrea Dworkin.
Well, I thought that it was a really I thought it was honest. It was a honest, like the Jane character was interesting to me because she's one of the first characters you see in the entire series, and she's swearing and she's like boisterous and confident and loud, and then the first time she sees Swearengen, she's terrified. Right, like she's trying to protect the girl, the young Norwegian girl, and then she sees Swearengen and she's just frozen. And then later she's crying and disappointed in herself. And this happens multiple times where you see her afraid to confront a man, even though she's like the manliest woman in the show. And then, I guess like her sort of character arc was, at the end of the movie, she saves Bullock from being killed. And I thought that was like, that was like a sort of a reasonable thing for her to do, right? Like she didn't get like
from behind. It wasn't wasn't she like she
and they connected it with the Wild Bill Hickok scene where she was worried that the same thing was going to happen to Bullock that happened to Wild Bill, and it wasn't like a physical altercation. She didn't like beat him up or like take on a guy in a physical combat, right? She shot him in the back of the head.
They spared us that. Although I thought that they really played up this lesbian a relationship. Like they basically became open lesbians, like in the movie. Charlie Utter, like, go get your girl. Like I doubt like people talked like that. Like they thought like the homosexuality was okay back then. They have like Joni sort of taking on the pimp role. But this was all fake, by the way. The Joni character is not real. There's no lesbian related Calamity Jane, as far as I've been able to find. There's no evidence if she was a lesbian or whatever. So this was this was completely made up. They did this as a sort of, they decided, well, this is what we need in 2018. And the other, I think, big theme of the movie though is how they sort of neutered Swearengen, and this is another reflection of going from 2008 to 2018. He becomes literally impotent, right? The new girl comes in and he can't get ready for her to give him oral sex, and then he like sort of cuddles with her and starts talking about his feelings towards Trixie, and I thought that was unrealistic. I thought that was unnecessary. I thought it was sort of representative of like the decade between when the show ended and when the movie was made. I think this was like the main theme of the movie, because it's like Swearengen is the biggest character, and he's just like, we enjoy all he's doing is being sick and impotent, and expressing his feelings in the movie. That's it. He doesn't have any kind of sort of arc besides that. He doesn't really, do anything. The story is really about Trixie and Saul and Hurst and Bullock. And yeah, I thought that it was a very, sort of deliberate, conscious move to sort of make that sort of Swearengen's fate.
Well, it's an elegy. I mean, it's an elegy. I mean, like it's an elegy for the show, right? Because it's the last thing they're going to get to make. It's an elegy for the frontier. It's also sadly, David Milch's elegy, right? It's the last thing I think that he'll make. And so there's a lot of that. He's tying up a lot of loose ends, kind of I think all at the same time. Let me though use this also to even more strongly advocate for the show, which is one of the things I really loved about the show is the characters were at each other's throats basically continuously. Even when they clearly had to work together, and even when they did successfully work together, they still hated each other. They still feared each other, right? And they were like on the knife's edge, like throughout all 3 seasons of the show, of just collapsing into internal warfare. And it's I thought that was great. I thought that was great because I thought it's what's the kind of person who would be on the frontier doing the kinds of things those guys are doing? Right, it would be extremely disagreeable, right? People, with these just incredible independent streaks, probably with serious, let's say, personality flaws that make them unsuited for living in what was at the time Eastern civilization. And so it shows the tension of that kind of thing. And by the way, I'll just tell you, in my world, you see startups like that. You see startups like that with these teams that are very high performing, and that you would think that they'd all be having a great time and all be going out to dinner and having fun, and they're at each other's throats most of the time. And then, by the way, sometimes it falls apart. Sometimes they destroy the thing because they just can't resist fighting, and sometimes they kind of hang on long enough to make the thing work. And so it's kind of part and parcel of that kind of person.
Even within, even among loyal allies, right? Like EB, there's no overt betrayal, but EB rips Al off here and there. Al predicts it too. Swearengen, whatever he sends EB off to collect money or something. He's sometimes he has to say look, I know normally you're stealing from me, but this time I need you to be I need you to actually make this delivery and be sincere. And then there was another scene where Swearengen knew EB was ripping him off, and he said something along the lines, there's offhand remark about I wouldn't respect him if he didn't try. He expects EB to do these kinds of things, to be a bit of a scoundrel, and this was just ordinary behavior, even among, he was a loyal ally to Al, a loyal assistant.
But that's not everyone on the frontier, right? Bullock and Starr have a good relationship, have a normal relationship where they're straightforward and honest with each other. Ellsworth is a saint. So
Ellsworth, yeah.
Charlie Utter, is Charlie just Utter. Naive and a simple, salt of the earth kind of guy.
But they don't have any power, though. Right? Well, I guess Bullock and Starr, arguably, but the most powerful characters, they are sort of cutthroat, and even Bullock has he's an honorable person, but he clearly, he has a hair trigger temper, and he's willing to sort of become excessive in use of violent force against criminals, and when he beats the guy who attempts to lynch Samuel, right? That was sort of his temper coming back to him and getting the better of him. So I guess that's not quite the
same. Al can't talk him out of. They alluded to this in the movie. Al cannot talk him out of the most direct path, right? They kind of do that in the movie where maybe Al finally does, but through the show, Al can't. This guy is constantly about to blow things from Al's perspective. Yeah. This guy's pig-headed, non-strategic. He can't think 3 moves ahead. He just does the thing that's directly in front of him, and left unchecked, disaster will follow.
Yeah. And so that even though they're allies, after the first season, Bullock and Swearengen, they become allies. Even those two, it's at any minute you wouldn't necessarily be surprised if a dispute between them led to them becoming enemies again, right? So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The other political, the sort of the political side of the times, I think, was the what's the black guy's name? Samuel is his name? Samuel Chase.
Fields? Samuel Fields, I think that's right.
Yeah, Samuel Fields. He when they think he's the murderer because of their racial profiling, and then when Bullock goes to arrest him, did you guys catch this? He's like, I'm gonna get my fishing pole. I'm putting my hands here because I'm gonna get my fishing pole. Please don't shoot me. And this is obviously hands up, don't why did he need to get his fishing pole? I don't know why he needed his fishing pole at the moment, but the point was they were showing us that
didn't want to leave it behind, man.
Yeah, it was Michael Brown. It was the long history of American racism as cops just shooting black men when they don't see their heads.
Yeah, that was but this was Bullock saved him again, right? Like Bullock saved him once from being tarred and feathered. Yeah. Bullock saves him again. Yeah, that was. I mean, that was a bit of a stretch. I thought, like the whole sort of plot with Samuel and Bullock having to save him, and then like breaking him free.
It's funny how the hivemind, because if this was 2008, if this was 2020, I mean, it would have been much more extreme version of this. And it's like funny how you can sort of how the hive mind works, right? It's like these people all think they're making original art, but you could really see within like 5-year windows, they're all like sticking to like the same 2 or 3 themes. I just think that's very fascinating.
Yeah, if you didn't know what year this movie was made, you'd be able to like roughly
his hands, then the lesbian thing, and then the show too. You could have predicted that too. Yeah, it's very easy, and they all have liberal themes in their own way, right? It's not like there's apolitical here, then there's political here. It's just they're always political, but there's the emphasis sort of shifts over time.
Yeah, I predicted that there would be at least one gay male character before the story concluded, and I was wrong. So
no, it was Languish. It was Languish or whatever his name is.
Languish. Was he really though? I mean, we didn't really see any.
He was. We talked about you remember he's bad. We had this exact same conversation.
Oh, yeah, But we don't. I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced. I don't know.
Richard is slurring theater kids again.
Yeah, that's just because he's in the theater troupe. I don't know. Maybe.
No, Swearengen says I'm thinking about becoming queer myself. Like obviously that because they know each other.
But that could have been a joke, or that could have been an insult.
It's funny because he is. Well, okay, maybe he's. Maybe he's making fun of him for.
For being in the theater.
Yeah. Well, didn't he have a wife or a girlfriend? Well, I couldn't even follow along with those scenes where he was talking to those women in the troupe. I don't know if one of them was one of his partners or his wife or something. I just that part of the.
I don't know. We didn't have anything like Joni and Calamity Jade, right? Like, no like graphic overt. Like this is clearly something.
The other thing we said in our conversation was that if this was late 2020s, late 2010s gayness, they wouldn't have been theater guys. He just would have been a normal, like you were expecting Cochran or like Merrick to be homosexual.
Or like Bullock to be a repressed homosexual.
Yes, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he's so uptight and angry, because he has to battle this conflict within him.
Eye for the straight guy era, like Ellen, like every gay person is just like
clearly gay.
Genetic. It's so distinguishable, and it's like a racial type or something, right? Well, today it's going to be like everyone is sort of gay, and you never know who it might be.
Although the last time we spoke, I thought that A.W. Merrick was going to be the gay one, because I still was predicting.
Hits on him, like pretty explicitly hits on him. I mean, this is another thing. He's like, I like you, and he's like, come with me, and Merrick sort of gets nervous and just doesn't seem to like it. But
I found out that the actor who plays Merrick is a registered sex offender. So it's like it would have been fitting, right? Like it would have been because it was like a 17-year-old boy who he was like sending lewd photos to or something. So
no, I
think I was picking up on the vibes.
No, the 17-year-old. I just looked at the Wikipedia article. It was 17 when the accusation was made, but the boy says he was 14.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So
okay. Well, still, gaydar was,
it was working. I mean, and the way this was done, like the way the series ended, like usually in like most shows or most movies or whatever, it's like at the end, like there's some major. And I don't know if I like this or I dislike this. I think I like it more than I dislike it. It's like you look at the big characters, like one of them has to like die or like go to like a completely new job or have like a complete transformation or like just be in a different place at the end of the series in the beginning. If you look at like the beginning of Deadwood to the end of the movie, Swearengen is the owner of the gem at the start of it. He's the owner of the gem at the start of it. I thought there might be some progression. He might become like mayor or something like that. But no, there was nothing like that.
Bullock becomes a marshal, right? He goes from Bullock had a kind of a trans because he didn't even want to be in law enforcement, right? He was a sheriff in Montana or something. I don't even know if he was the sheriff, but or maybe deputy. And then he goes to Deadwood and resists becoming the sheriff, and then reluctantly takes up the mantle. And then by the time of the movie, he's the marshal. So there's a bit of a progression there.
Well, there is, but the movie
he's still like the same guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the movie, there's no change. I mean, there's 10 years past, but there's no change within the movie for Bullock, and there's no change for Hearst, and there's no change for Swearengen, right? Nobody dies, nobody moves on to anything else. And so, like, the most important people who die in the entire series are like Ellsworth and Bill Hickok and Charlie Utter, right? Not like the top. Maybe Hickok was in the first few episodes, but not really the top tier. Nobody dies, and it's interesting.
But the change is techno-capitalism wins. The change is the frontier ends. Like, this is it. This is the end of the line, right? The telephone's here. Like, this is it. They're done.
So the substitute is the society is the protagonist here, not the characters.
Yeah. And it's finished. It's finished. We just saw the last scene of the society. Hearst wins everything from here on out. It's all over, and now it's a tourist trap. And they have good buffalo burgers at the corner, whatever place with all the mementos on the wall.
Did Civilization actually win in the real Deadwood? How big is the town of Deadwood today?
It's a tourist town.
Yeah, there's nothing going on there. I looked it up.
They do like they'll do. You can go there. They'll do like Wild Bill Hickok, like they'll do like they'll do recreations of like the Wild Bill Hickok show. They'll do like sharpshooting exhibitions. I'm sure
the buildings. The Gem and the Bella Union? Are those things still open?
Well, they're either open or they've been rebuilt 8 times, and they tell you it's still the real thing, right? Like it's a tourist trap. Of course, it's a tourist trap. Like it's a vanished age.
Has it been a tourist trap since before the HBO show? Has it always been, or is it since that show aired that it became a tourist attraction?
I think so. I mean, it's the logical. I mean, there's nothing else. Right? In the modern world, that's all there is for it, right? Like,
there's no Chinatown there. But there was. I was shocked. I was, because so my girlfriend is partly Chinese by ancestry. She was telling me about it. She's like, why would there be a Chinatown in South Dakota? This doesn't make any sense. And we looked it up. There was one.
There was one.
There was like up to 400 Chinese immigrants at one point. I don't know, railroads and whatever, but. Yeah, that was one thing I did. So Wu didn't learn any more English after 10 years. I'm
he had a few words.
Yeah, he learned like 6 words in 10 years.
Yeah, he had a grandson. That's the other thing. I think like season 2 ends with him cutting off his ponytail, like Wu, America.
Yeah, and he learned 6 words in 10 years. Like, he didn't really assimilate, did you? Like,
so I'm looking at the population of Deadwood over time. In 1880, it was 3,700. In 2020, it's 1,100. So it's less than a third as big, and it hasn't actually picked up since it's 2000. Right? 2000 was about 1,300. So it's actually declined since the show came out. So it's really like, it doesn't seem like anything really won. It seems like the American West, and maybe this is like not like talked to in the show, but a lot of the American West sort of was a missed opportunity. You look at the extent to which the American West is federal lands. If you look at those maps, like how much is federal lands and how much is like given to the Indians and how much is like, not available for development. Civilization almost like pretty much, Milch, I don't think is making this point, but Civilization didn't win to nearly the extent it could have in the West. You still have South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana. These places, they could be booming. They could be big cities. They could draw in, immigrants and, people getting cheap land and having a lot of babies. And that's just not what we did. We took another sort of path.
Well, I'm on the Deadwood website, the Deadwood City website. Historic Deadwood, entertaining guests since 1876. So the form of entertainment has changed, but they got that part right.
Yeah.
Historic recreations, sports betting now available.
Okay, cool.
Big news. Unique shops. Let's see. ATVs. St. Patrick's Day celebration coming up. And then lots of waffle fries in the food section.
Is prostitution legal in South Dakota, in Deadwood?
Prostitution, I believe, is not, but I will tell you, casinos sure are, and apparently Deadwood has its pin. So,
all right, good. Well, I read somewhere that David Milch was big into gambling, so he's a horses guy. Right.
And he made
like millions. Yeah.
There was an abortive. He made an abortive horse racing show called, I think, Luck with Dustin Hoffman's first year, which is actually pretty fun. But the show got euthanized after they had to euthanize, I think, 3 horses. Could not.
Oh,
Another sign of civilization winning is you can't make horse racing shows anymore because the horses might get hurt.
Yeah.
So
Hurst
yeah, I'm
crash.
looking at the website too. It has a it has a history. Oh man, I wish I found this before. It has a E.B. Farnham. It has a like you could look at it. They could talk. They give you a little few paragraphs on each one of these people. Poker Alice Tubbs. So there was another woman who was Poker Alice Tubbs, was a double outfit for fighting this lady. Okay, well this is fascinating. The So yeah, I did a lot of reading on the sort of the history of this thing. There was a book I found on Amazon called Deadwood, Deadwood's Alan Swearengen. So I pretty much went through that book before this, and then there was I found one biography of George Hurst that I could get on Kindle, so I got that too. And so it was interesting to read, about sort of the history, and that sort of tells you. I think something about sort of what's going on in the mind of David Milch when he made this. First of all, Hearst. I mean, everything I see about Hearst is he was a nice man who was a philanthropist. Never any evidence that he killed anyone. He was like I couldn't find any evidence he ever met Al Swearengen or he had anything to do with Seth Bullock or any of these people. So it's completely made up. It's like he went there, for his mining reasons, but it's like, a capitalist once was in the city, so that was all you needed to make him the villain and say, okay, he represents everything. Okay, you step foot in that town, yes, we're going to take your name, George Hurst, and we're going to make you into this super villain. So I just thought that this is what people are going to remember George Hurst for, and it's a very sad thing.
Yeah, they didn't even change his name, right? They used his real first and last name.
Hurst, yeah.
Didn't even fictionalize it or dramatize. Okay.
But of course, this is number one in the tradition of Citizen Kane, right, which did much the same thing to W.R. Hearst, and then of course this is also of course what they did to all the so-called robber barons, right? So I was telling Richard, now we need to talk about Leland Stanford because they did the same thing to him.
Yeah, tell us about the crypt at Stanford.
Yeah, so I go visit. It's an amazing thing. So the Stanford family crypt is still at Stanford University. I didn't even know it. I stumbled on it when I was taking a long walk one day during COVID. And I literally stumbled on it, and they keep there's the family crypt. There's a statue, and it's legitimately heartbreaking. The story of Stanford University is one of these stories. So Stanford University, if you look at the name, the full name is Leland Stanford Junior University, and you're like, okay, that's interesting, Junior. And then it's the actual robber baron, quote unquote, right? The actual guy, Leland Stanford, was not Junior; he was Senior, and he's one of the guys who built the National Railroad System. Bringing civilization to the land, and he and his wife, who by all accounts had a very close relationship, their whole lives, had a single child who was a son who made it to age 16 and got sick and died. And so there's literally a quote. There's a quote on the statue which basically is where they basically agree that the children of California will become their children, right? By creating this university. And I mean, look, we sit here today. Stanford now is 100 and some years old, and I mean, for whatever issues it's going through today, it's over the last 100 years, wow, right? Its contributions to our civilization are extraordinary. And so there's this statue, and the statue will break your heart because it's Leland Stanford and his wife and the 16-year-old son. And it's one of these things where they're looking to the future, right? They're just as happy as can be looking to the future. And it's his son, the age that his son, actually died in real life. And so here again, it's the same, to Richard's point, it's the same. It's the same thing. You have this guy who literally helped, played a major role in carving civilization out of the wild. And then, it did this incredible philanthropic, kind of thing. By the way, his wife continued to actually oversee and run Stanford, years after Leland's death. There's some story where she may have been poisoned to death by her enemies, which is there's some book that came out on this that goes through it that I haven't read yet. So there's additional drama that even follows his death. But yeah, I mean, look, it worked. The railroad worked. Stanford University worked. He had plenty of critics in his age. He has plenty of critics today. None of them have done anything remotely similar to what he was able to do on two fronts.
What are the critiques of him? Is it just that he was a robber baron capitalist? Okay.
Yeah, it's the full Ida. It's the full Ida Tarbell. He's one of the group. He's one of the core robber barons. He's one of the kind of core set. And so it's a lot of the same. It's how dare you? I mean, there's all the old critiques, which is how dare all the old traditionalist capitalist critiques. And then, of course, in today's morality, that you would layer on top all of the all of the modern stuff. And then, I mean, look, he was I don't know his history in detail, but like he was doing business in the 1800s. Like, I mean, let's just assume for the moment, maybe maybe he might have occasionally bribed a politician. I don't know. Like, would not be the strangest thing that ever happened. So, it's one of these things where it's like, okay, like, it's can you pick apart every single thing he did the way the muckrakers at the time tried to do it? I mean, yeah, you can if you want to. Can you evaluate him in the whole sweep of civilization as somebody who like really helped carry us forward? Like, no question.
Yeah. You look at U.S. GDP growth during the era of the robber barons. I mean, it was high. I mean, you were getting some years 10% growth. Yes.
Well, they were fielding. I mean, this is the J.P. Morgan era of J.P. Morgan. I mean, this was the the economic history, right? Is basically what was happening during that period was capital had accumulated in Europe as a consequence of the European Industrial Revolution, and then they were starting to stall out. And then when the American frontier opened, they just huge amounts of European capital flooded into the U.S. J.P. Morgan was one of the nodes of that in New York, and then his father Junius Morgan, right, was in London, and basically the family business was to get the capital from the old world to the new world, and railroads and then electrification were kind of the two big sinks. And look, they deployed the capital and it worked, right? Like, and these systems, to this day, like these railroads are still running, and so like it's one of the great all-time achievements in terms of actually creating our entire world.
Yeah. Stanford and Hearst were senators, at the same time. And I mean, where I live in California,
they were contemporaries.
Yeah, they were the two senators from California when Hearst's life. And there's another guy named Huntington. There's something out here right outside Los Angeles called the Huntington Gardens, and there's a big Huntington Road. So there's a guy named Huntington too, and he's got a sort of just like this big land in the San Gabriel Valley that's a botanical garden and like a museum and all this stuff. These guys built civilization, and they're I mean, I don't know this, I don't know this period, well enough. Is there any argument that is this just basically anti-capitalist, normal animus that's always there? Or is there any argument that they were like, stealing other people's property and doing stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, these guys, I don't want to, I don't know specifically individually, but like, look, I mean, they had it in the movie. It's like, they bring in the telephone. There's like one guy who's like preventing the telephone from being completed, right? I mean, therefore the, eminent domain, this is what eminent domain exists for. So the real life Charlie Utters can literally not hold back the progress of civilization. One has to imagine, it's just like Rockefeller, to build these empires in that era, one has to imagine that, various, they did various things along the way that, judged individually, you would very much frown on.
Yeah, I mean, but they built the railroads. Charlie Utter is a parasite in that situation. I mean, who cares about Charlie Utter and his stupid, he likes to fish in the creek and, hang out with his black friend. Like, that's like not the point. Like, Hearst is giving him like a good price for it. And was it always like, were these guys just playing within the rules of like a system that wasn't rigged towards them? It was like rigged towards. It wasn't rigged towards. I mean, it protected.
It wasn't rigged.
Property.
Yeah.
It was protected.
The most legitimate kind of attack would be that they had money on their side, and then they had they would deploy violence, right? And again, I'm not going to malign any individual person because I don't know the details, but like the Pinkertons, they do this in the show. They bring in the Pinkertons.
But are those real? What are the Pinkertons supposed to be? Or is that a real thing?
Pinkertons. So the Pinkertons is a major quote unquote private detective agency that actually still exists. And it's kind of, for a very long time, it was kind of the go-to basically agency that you would call up like when you had like union disputes, like you were trying to break strikes. So legend has that the Pinkertons were who Thomas Edison would hire so Thomas Edison invents the movie camera and like all this technology, and then basically to film a movie during the Edison era, you had to license Edison's patents. And then you had all of these basically entrepreneurs who sprung up originally on the East Coast in New York and New Jersey who were making movies, and they had no intention of paying for the patents. And so the legend goes Edison would hire the Pinkertons or people like them, and then they would come in and break legs and bust up destroy the cameras.
But what if the union? The union is
the mafia.
But the union, the union is basically stopping people from working. I mean, what like if you hate unions, if you hate unions and you think they're evil, like is there any is there any anything they were doing that actually I would disapprove of? That's what I'm asking. Like the union.
Well, they were violating. I mean, at least in theory. I mean, they were violating. They were violating at the time Edison's. Sorry, were they doing it? Yeah, they were violating. So the unions. Well, the patents.
Then the Pinkertons are the good guys in the Edison, because Edison had a patent, right? He had the legal.
Right, exactly, right.
Okay.
But anyway, this is one of the reasons why Hollywood actually ended up on the West Coast. There's two reasons Hollywood ended up on the West Coast, because all the entrepreneurs were East Coast guys. There's two reasons why Hollywood ended up on the West Coast. One is the weather. They could shoot around. They could shoot around through the year. But the other was literally to get 3,000 miles away from Edison and his leg breakers.
All right.
Okay. So now there are some people who think that IP law needs reform. So I don't feel as strongly about that as I do about labor unions.
So then did Alma prevent Hearst from basically like implementing his strategy of the telephone poles?
She was doing something herself. She was digging up it wasn't like the I think the difference was this was just like Utter was just about the location. While I don't know if it was like a scale thing with Alma. I don't think it was like that much more valuable if Hearst had that
bit of land.
A bit of land. Yeah, I think so. Alma could use it productively, while Utter couldn't do anything. Just himself with that piece of land.
So it's better that Alma has it then. So I didn't realize that she had a plan, right? Like I couldn't tell if she had a plan to purchase that land, or if that was just merely to cock block her.
She had a business, right? She had miners, didn't she?
Yeah. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter because obviously she lost. Like obviously it didn't matter. Like it didn't matter at all the history that she bought the land. Like in the end, Deadwood, like, it didn't matter at all. Like she and everybody else other than Hurst just spitting into the tsunami that's coming. That's to me that was the poignancy to it. Like it's the last thing that she could do to hold back the tide of progress. There was that point. There was one of my favorite scenes in the original show was the telegraph scene that you guys talked about, and the other little twist in that scene that I just love is Dan, the loyal underling Dan, offers, he's like, just give the word, Al, I'll chop down all the telegraph, towers.
What telegraph?
Right, and the Swearengen is like fully aware that will accomplish exactly nothing. Right, it's like or like Bullock burning the the telephone poles this time. Like it's like that will accomplish nothing. That will hold nothing back.
Yeah, that's funny.
Techno-capitalism wins, and we're all better off for it. That's my story, and I'm sticking.
I guess there could be an argument. I mean, even though Hearst was an evil capitalist, Richard, you and I talked about how he is still like a relatively genteel and forward-thinking in terms of race. Right, like he's very polite to the black characters in the show.
2000s liberals don't care about that. That's not the biggest thing to them, right?
I think by 2018, like although I guess like Hearst's character, he had already been established by that point.
Now he's framing the black guy. Hearst. Now you have to use that concordance. The evil capitalist has to also be racist. Right, so before he was like the most tolerant. Now he's
trying to framing Samuel for this. Right. Okay, so that does add to his villainy.
Samuel, but I mean, but it was in his intro. I mean, he didn't purposely set out that.
It's so convenient. It's one black guy in town who just happens to witness the murder. Right, like that's what are the odds?
Yes.
And therefore, the other just amazing thing was they don't just like everybody else just gets shot. But of course, this guy they have to try to string up in the middle of the day. Right.
Yeah, they couldn't just shoot him. Yeah.
Let's think, isn't that what they did to black people back then? I mean, didn't they have a sort of a cultural method of?
Probably got shot too, right? Like probably,
and white people got lynched too, and I think white people got tarred and feathered.
Yeah, there wasn't like a law. You have to kill someone.
It's not a good tactical move in their part to go for the. They should have just bullet to the back of the head.
Yeah. Solved. Yeah. So the things that were real in the show. So Swearengen was a real person. Bullock was a real person. Saul Starr was a real person. Calamity Jane was real. Now, Calamity Jane, from what I could tell, apparently like her, she was just like a braggart who might have never really done anything in life and pretended to be much bigger than she was.
Was she an alcoholic? Was she really like a drunk?
I don't know if she was alcoholic. She was a braggart. I don't know. I assume she probably was an alcoholic. And then Otter and Bill Hickok did come into town together. They did sort of know each other. Hickok got shot the day after Bullock arrived in town. So Bullock and Hickok probably never met each other.
They weren't friends, yeah.
They weren't like super friends, going out and solving crimes. Alma Garrett is a completely fictitious character. Joni is fictitious. Cy Tolliver is fictitious, although there was a Bella Union. It was run by a guy named Tom Miller, who performed in blackface sometime. But this is also what I learned, that there was a lot of blackface in the Gem and the and Bella Union. That was a bit, there was also like comedians who would pretend to be Jewish or Italian or whatever. I think they wanted to make fun of.
Okay.
They didn't show any of that. The Gem also had like a lot of like skaters, like roller blading was like a big thing, and like sort of like gymnastics and like these sort of like these trapeze. So we didn't see any of that. It was just all prostitution and drink.
A little gambling,
Yeah,
there's some gambling and yeah. Was there like there was a talent show or something? I think in season 3 they had some kind of a talent. Richardson was juggling.
The troupe set that up. Yeah, not the Gem. And the other thing that was fake was I couldn't find any evidence that like Swearengen was like a political mover and shaker. Like I couldn't find any. So that this, from what I could tell, this connection between like the business of the Gem and like running sort of the politics of the town, that appears to be fictitious. Silas Adams was a real person. Him and Swearengen would like show off and like shoot guns together. Dan Doherty used to work at the Gem and then worked at the Bella Union with Tom Miller. He was working there for a while. Interestingly enough, he's seen as the flunky of Swearengen in the film. Bullock's he never had a brother, as far as we know. The nephew, the William, who died in that heartbreaking way. There's no record of that. Him and Martha Martha was his wife. It was supposed to be a love match. It was like they were in love. This story was completely made up. And they did have 3 kids or whatever, and that's what they showed in the movie. They gave Bullock a full family.
Above replacement rate fertility.
Yeah, they gave him the fertility. Oh, Swearengen, by the way, was married multiple times. He would always beat the women, and they'd run away. And this was like sort of known in the town, and he'd end up in court. Swearengen was an abuser. Was an abuser of women. There was a okay, this is interesting. Swearengen got sued by this one guy over something. He was always getting sued. And like he would lose control over the Gem and like run it from behind the scenes and then come back. Like he did this was so weird, worked for like 10, 15 years. And then there was this one guy who like sued him, and then he was given like a suite like in the Gem. And then he went to like some other saloon, and there was a prostitute there named Trix, who he assaulted while drunk, and then she shot him. And then the guy survived. And then felt bad about it because he like had gone after Trix. And then this became a thing where like, he was a sweet guy, and the woman, everyone was sympathetic towards her. And so, yeah, you can see it's like bits and pieces of like different names and different people, and they're bringing it together. It's fiction.
Yeah, a lot of creative license.
To say the least, a lot of creative license. I mean,
but Swearengen was never in the show. He had no wife, right? And and Tolliver was Hurst in the show. He didn't have a wife, did he?
No, he did. No, he wrote a letter or something to his wife. Yeah.
Oh, he did. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Because the Deadwood itself is like we've talked about. It's just not like a camp or settlement for families, and so Bullock seems to be like the only real family. Although he actually in the movie Sol Star and Trixie have a child. She has this this funny line about how like it's a miracle that a whore of my vintage could give birth. And then I started to do the mental math of like how old is she supposed to be then? Like is she 10 years on? So I mean, how old was she in the series? She must have been in her late 20s, early 30s. So she 40. Yeah.
She would have been getting up there.
Yeah. 40, especially at 40 in the late 19th century. 40, could women really get pregnant at that age back then? I don't know. Saul looked really like he aged badly, man. He looked rough.
So another thing on the fictionalization. So I also found something a little poignant about this. I can't remember if they talked about this in the series or not, but so like the mythology of Wild Bill Hickok was already in effect when he was still alive, right? And so that, like, he had become actually a character in the popular consciousness, and there were what Wikipedia refers to as contemporary myth makers. And so there were stories, sagas, there were stage shows at the time, there were dime novels or whatever the version was at the time. Like he was a cultural figure, like when he was still alive, and they actually do a little bit of this in the show, because when he shows up, everybody knows who he is, right? Like his kind of legend precedes him, and he's trying to like play it down. And so, they're consistent with the sort of theme of like the sort of end of an era, emergence of modernity. Like the whole thing was already being fictionalized and mythologized, right? In reality, it was being mythologized while it was basically in its last phases. And so anyway, Milch, you could say, is carrying on the great American tradition of mythologizing something that had already mythologized itself.
And the other interesting thing, I mean, this is about the real life Swearengen, is that there was there was a big expose in, like, I think it was called the Black Hills, like the Black Hills Times or something, or Pioneer or something. It wasn't the Deadwood Pioneer, it was the Black Hills newspaper. And like he had brought girls to Deadwood under false pretenses. Like they were working in Chicago or elsewhere. And he was saying, you're going to work in like this nice hotel and just like, hang out here and, you're going to have a nice job. And they would come, and then he'd say, okay, you owe me for the boots and your shoes. And, you basically can't leave. It doesn't really portray this in the movie, or the show, or the movie. I think that's sort of going too far for a guy to like enslave women, to like kidnap them and like make them prostitutes, sort of against their will. So the movie does, the series and the movie do flinch, I think, a little bit about how ugly the reality really was. And there was this one case where like this like white knight sort of like the community knows this. The community has like this, the gem has this reputation. And so like, originally the papers are like, oh, look at all the fun and games that are going on in the gem. And then they do this big expose, and they're like, the marshal like goes over there and like is like, any women want to leave, come with me. And then like a few are taken out, and then they're like interviewed by the paper. So a few of the women like do get out, and so like the gem like gets this like terrible reputation in the area. There was another case where they told there was these guys who like sent a letter or something that they were like, their wives were like being held against their will, and it turned out they weren't really their wives. They were just some guys who were like screwing around or something, but like the girls were actually happy to be here. But so this show, like, we watch it and we're like, oh, this is like real, like the mud. Mark is really enamored by the mud, and I think the medical scenes are also very like stuff's coming out
horrific.
Of his penis. I mean, this is brutal stuff. I mean, that you're looking at. What Tolliver says, oh, I'm gonna feel pain every time I shit for the rest of my life, when he tells that that preacher who stabbed him, or he tells somebody else that. But still, like, we can't take like the full extent of the ugly. Like, they all have their teeth, right? All the prostitutes have their teeth. They're not as short as, I mean, I guess you couldn't find actors as short as that. It's probably be hard to find. Even their clothes, the mud gets on the dresses and stuff, but like,
they're clean when they're inside. Yeah, after they walk through the mud, they look,
they're otherwise clean. You don't see them, you don't see them defecate. You see them peeing in public. You don't see them defecating. You sort of wonder where they defecate.
How did plumbing work back then? Like, do you guys was there just like an outdoor like a you could John or something?
Chamber pot, and then you empty the chamber pot into the street in the morning.
Just out into the thoroughfare.
Out into the thoroughfare.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Damn.
That wasn't just mud. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
And the horses would have been pooping. The horses.
Of course. Of course, everywhere. Yeah.
So the doctor character actually is more interesting. I didn't realize this when I first was watching it, but then I kind of included it. So the doctor character is a little bit more interesting than he comes across, because he just comes across as like this super like wound up guy. But like if you track him and the things that he talks about and the things that he does through the course of the show, like he's actually doing original applied medical research on the fly, right? Because like medicine in those days, like they really did not know much, right? And like he was literally and he was the character is a very curious guy. And so he is literally trying to cobble together basically an actual medical science like on the fly. And if you remember that, it was the one with the most striking example of that was there was the episode where the guy got shot in the head and didn't die. Remember how transfixed.
I think that was loosely based on the real life shooting of the trick. So she shot this guy and then he survived. So yeah,
exactly, yeah. And the doctor is just like completely transfixed because he's like trying to figure out how the brain, he's literally trying to figure out how the brain works.
Yeah.
And by the way, in much the same way that a medical researcher today would be transfixed by that same opportunity.
Yeah. I'm still interested in just how far advanced medical science was at that point, because the doc in the show is remarkably competent, and people go to him and they trust him, and he seems to actually sort of bring people out of their injuries and their maladies. But at least like whatever sort of secondhand knowledge and stuff that I've accrued just from reading and stuff is just like back then, like you may have been better off never seeing a doctor, because of how ugly and backwards the medicine was.
So there's a school of thought that says actually things really have not advanced that much since then, right? And so, I mean, there are certain things. I mean, the antibiotics are a big deal. There are certain things like Al. I don't know. Al could have gotten a liver transplant or something, right? Like there's certain things you could do today that you couldn't do then, but. People in those days, if you survived childhood, I think you lived as long as people do today, right? I think you'd have people
I've heard
living
that too.
You had people, all the people who used to live in their 40s, not live in their 80s stuff. I think is statistically just an artifact of child mortality. If you made it to adulthood, many people did live into their 80s. Basically, human lifespan has not extended, and then we still have a very broad cross section of things today that we still it turns out fighting cancer is actually really hard, and a lot of people still die of cancer. And so it's and then look, like there's the whole replication crisis is like ripping its way through medicine. Like there's a fair amount of evidence now that a lot of drugs that are on the market like may not actually work because the science behind them was basically fake. And so like. You wouldn't want to trade, but like I don't, it's not clear to me that we've actually advanced that much. And actually, he might actually have been not only a good doctor for the time, but him plus maybe a bag full of a couple of different kinds of antibiotics.
Medical textbooks.
A pretty good doctor today, actually.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Richard, you kind of made a similar argument, right? That you thought that the doctors back then probably weren't so bad.
Yeah, I mean, the prosthetics thing, they had experience with that from the Civil War. There was a lot of prosthetics. And then the other thing was the, in the season 1, they have the vaccine thing and then the quarantine thing. Like a very basic, like what we're still doing today, vaccines and, quarantine. So they knew enough to...
Well, back then, we were quarantining sick people. Now we're quarantining healthy people. So it's a little different. We've advanced a lot since then. Huge.
That's in our understanding. Yeah. So
they didn't for some reason they weren't wearing masks for the next 3 years, which shows something that they were.
Yeah.
Well, that's because this was as COVID.
Yeah.
To be fair.
They were so into the vaccine. I think today that would have been seen as like sort of a left wing coded thing. It wasn't even a right wing coded thing back. It wasn't even a left wing coded thing back then. But today there'd be like big pharma sponsored by Satan and Pfizer.
No. Richard, when you put this up on YouTube, you're going to get that little COVID warning in the description now.
Is it the machine learning? Does it just go and see if he's mentioned COVID?
I think it's automatic now. I think it's,
oh well. We'll have to deal with it. So the medicine, I don't know how true that was. Like if people were stupid, as we think they are. Like the leeching, the bleeding thing, that was the problem. You don't see him do that, right? He doesn't use leeches. He gives people opium. He helps with childbirth. You're right. He's too competent. I think you're right about that.
Well, he's either too competent or he's just like there are certain basics of actual medicine.
Yeah.
And they were basic then and they're basic now. And it actually, the field maybe hasn't moved as much as we would like to believe.
Yeah. Although I think like with like pain management, right? Like it was it had like honest depictions of like the physical pain that people went through when they were sick and injured, right? Like the scenes with Al when he had his gallstones and inserting the metal needle into his urethra and like all of that stuff was just like horrifying to watch. And I think like today, like one reason you wouldn't want to go back, even if the procedures were roughly equally effective, today at least we understand how to like basically blunt the pain or knock you out with anesthetics. I mean, in that sense, like the blessings of modernity.
We have that, but like, look, they had opium then. We have opium now. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
Another, interesting thing, part of the real story that they made into fiction was Al wasn't an orphan or anything like that in real life. It looks like he just had like a normal family that was, dad was in business, or he did some ranching or whatever. And then and so I think another like sort of this thing of modernity is like, oh, this guy's a pimp. He must have been he must have been from a broken home,
mistreated.
And now, he takes people away from their families because once he didn't have his own family, right? So
I think they have to make Swearengen simple. Like if you have to make a character like that, like anti-heroes often have these sympathetic backstories, right? Like especially in the beginning, like Swearengen becomes progressively more sympathetic, and you sort of wins you over. But like in the first episode, especially when he's just like bouncing Trixie off the walls, it's like it's really tough to like find this character likable at first. So.
I mean, was it? I mean, it was a symbolic of like the things, people going soft. But is it realistic that he like his values sort of transform, where he's cuddling with some prostitute at the end and telling her, about his feelings and like sort of being reflective? Is that really?
Well, he's getting up in age by then. I mean, how old is that? I mean, he's probably in his 50s, or maybe T levels dropping, and
cuddle.
Yeah. You see those studies, right? Like once you reach a certain age, your T levels decline, and you just become a softer, more feminine man with age, unless you take some HGH and.
So we didn't see. So Tolliver. We were talking about Tolliver. End of season 3, he said Hearst was going to let him run all the non-mining interests in the town. So it looks like if there was going to be a season 4, Tolliver was going to be a big deal. He, the guy who played him died like a year before the movie came out. So that's why Tolliver was not in Deadwood. It's funny. Joni somehow ends up owning Bella Union. We're not told exactly how. We just know that Tolliver's gone and she owns it. Mark, what did you think? Me and Rob talked about Tolliver. What do you think about the Tolliver character?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed a little duplicative in the original series, to be totally honest. Like, it was a little bit of a slight, maybe more, I don't know, more genteel Swearengen. I will say I'm a sucker for that actor, Powers Booth. I think it's just one of the great all-time American actors, and it's just magnetic in anything he's in. It's just like tremendously fun to watch. If you guys haven't seen it, there's a great 80s movie called Extreme Prejudice. With him and I think Nick Nolte facing off, and it's like a modern neo-western, and it's a fantastic. It's one.
You think it was duplicative? I thought he was like, I thought he was definitely a darker and a more. It's sort of he's like more elevated and darker at the same time. He's like they have a higher level.
Well, I mean, the kind of arc, right? Kind of what you guys talking about, like the arc a little bit, or maybe this kind of struck me at the time was, it's like Swearengen is introduced as like the darkest possible character, and then like a lot of the drama, a lot of how Milch operates is like, oh yeah, like you think he's dark, you wait till you see what's coming, and then and then it's basically a progression from Swearengen to Tolliver, and then ultimately to Hurst. And it's when the show was made, like it was like this was the first time that people like Milch had been allowed to put full anti-heroes right on television like that had not previously been allowed, and so it was the same time as Don Draper and Tony Soprano and so forth. And so, but it let him, it let him evolve the Swearengen character to take on more nuance, and then ultimately kind of turn into a full-fledged good guy. But that said, I did really enjoy the descent. Like dramatically, it was like tremendous fun to see the additional layers of darkness and to see Swearengen, actually turning out to not be that bad in comparison.
Yeah, so the Tolliver episode where he captures the 2 teenage robbers and executes them. I mean, that might have been like one of the most chilling scenes of any show I've ever seen. Just like how vicious he is and the pleasure he appears to take in torturing them before he kills them while Joni's watching is like, yeah, that's like, I mean, among all of the sort of like the HBO dramas, like that was one of the like hardest to watch.
Well, the other was the serial killer guy, the guy who was killing the prostitutes like that. And you guys may know that one of the classic pieces of Deadwood trivia is that the same actor played Jack McCall, who was the degenerate lowlife who killed Wild Bill, and then Jack McCall died, and then that same actor came back to play Wolcott.
What?
Same guy. Yeah,
you
same
gotta
guy.
Be kidding me.
Yeah, same guy.
Wild.
Brilliant actor. Absolutely brilliant actor.
Yeah, he's like some like down and out redneck, and then he becomes this sort of
genteel sociopath.
Yeah.
That's the same guy.
Genius performances.
That's crazy. Wow. Yeah, that just blew my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, when Tolliver's taunting that girl, he gives her like a concussion, gives her brain damage. He's like, "Oh, you see it double, honey." He's like showing something in front of her before he kills them. Yeah, that was cool. I also liked when Tolliver shot Leon. That was like the way he insults and like berates people is really funny. So that Janine girl, like there was going to be something there. Like she, he's gonna shoot her, and she just shows him her breasts, and I guess like that turns him on or something. So he doesn't kill her. He shoots Leon, and it's just hilarious. Leon is like, and then like Leon is bleeding to death, and he's telling Leon, he's like telling him, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna control the town, on behalf of Hearst." And then Leon's like, "Congratulations, Mr. Tolliver," like as he's bleeding out, and then he's like, "Yeah, thank you, Leon. You were gonna die saying stupid things, like you've always been stupid." I just love that. I just love that. Those was great, and I wanted to see more of Tolliver. I never thought we got the full story of his relationship with Joni. I mean, I don't know if we got that. What was that scene where he comes in, end of one of the early episodes, and she's making out with those girls in the bathtub? Is it like, what was that? It was showing us Joni was a lesbian. That's the first time we saw that. But what was sort of the point that Tolliver just sort of like looks at her and then like walks out?
I mean, was that, I kind of took that as like they may have had like a budding romance at one point, but then he could just accept that she was into women and that, whatever, they would remain close, like platonic, remain in a sort of a platonic close relationship, but whatever romance there was sort of the spark died. Okay. That was kind of my take. So yeah, the Johnny character, she had this scene early on too. Was she talking to Jane at one point where she had a kind of a dark backstory too, where she was talking about how she was like having sex with her sisters when she was a kid.
Yeah, with
and
her dad. Her dad sold her to Tolliver. And Tolliver saved her. I guess Tolliver was better than her dad or something.
Okay, so yeah, so that's sort of whatever, like softened the Tolliver character to some extent then.
Yeah, that's funny. So he was just whipped over. Yeah, he was just whipped over Jody, and that was his entire, existence. It's funny the women who, these men, become sort of enamored with. The overweight woman who Swearengen ended up with, she doesn't make it to the movie. Who knows? Who knows what happened to her?
Right.
Heart disease.
She was a great, by the way. Yeah. She was a great actress. Her performance actually is really, really quite is very entertaining.
Those were very compelling scenes. Yeah,
she was great. She was a full participant in the acting.
And
by the way, another great acting. You guys, another Deadwood trivia thing is the Jewel is the actress actually is a. I forget is it muscular dystrophy or whatever it is, but it's That's she is a real actress who has that medical condition.
Ooh, interesting.
And again, it's just like one of the great things about the show is just like it was like a full participant in she was just apparently tickled pink as an actress to be able to be in those scenes.
Well, she aged. I think she aged more than like anyone else. I mean, she looked like she gained like 25 years. She was like an old woman by the time. The show, and maybe that's just how people with muscular dystrophy.
Yeah, I wondered if that was because of her condition or because the show just decided to make her look especially old, and so they did the makeup and the hair and everything to look that way. But I'd read about that too. That she really had.
She moves pretty much the same, although she looks.
Cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy. Yeah, one of the first people on TV with the cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, one of the first scenes shows Dan and Johnny, and now they're dressed up. They don't wear like their ripped up clothes. They're like it's showing like civilization has like sort of moved forward. You see the new buildings, and you see these guys like they're wearing more normal, more proper clothes. They look like they got old. And Johnny, I thought in the original show, was like 20s. Like he looked really young to me. But then he's got gray hair 10 years later. So I don't know if I miss
some guys go gray like pretty fast, right? Okay. Like that does happen. But I think there is something. I think they made a lot of these characters maybe accelerated the aging just to maybe show how much time has passed. But then the women still look like they age much better, I thought, than the men did. Like Alma doesn't look that different. Trixie doesn't look that different either. But everyone else, Swearengen, I think like he looked about like 10 years had passed, but everyone else just looked so much older than I would have thought.
Bullock and Bullock's personality. Bullock looked older, and his personality had. I felt his personality had changed. He'd become more of a. He'd become more cocky and sort of more as as a sort of stereo. Like before, he was like a sort of a guy who was just about duty and honor. Maybe the Old West did this to him. He became more of like a cocky lawman. Like when they take the Chinese boy and then he like does the superhero thing where he just shoots the guy. This guy, we didn't get a lot of that in the series, like superhuman feats of accomplishment, like Walter White kind of things. But that was like one exception to it, which I liked. It was like very, it was sort of a very, it was used judiciously. Like you didn't see this like jump the shark stuff all the time, but you did see it in that like one case. But I don't feel like the Bullock of the first season would have had like the confidence or just like the hubris to try something like that.
Yeah, he is more confident in his role, and yeah, I mean he did sort of move from sheriff to marshal, and I think he like fully embraced, being a lawman in a way he didn't in season 1, where he didn't want to be like, what he didn't take the sheriff role. Wasn't he like, he took some subsidiary, some secondary role in the town's leadership.
Wasn't it fire? Wasn't he fire? Was
it fire? Yeah, maybe it might have been fire. Something like that. But
fire was a big deal. Yeah, Deadwood burned down a bunch of times. They didn't show. Yeah, they didn't show that.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, that would have been an interesting episode if they had like a wildfire or something. Maybe that was in the offing, right? Like from what I read, like Milch was planning to do season 4 and possibly season 5, and it was cut short because of budget issues and all these other things. But it seemed like there were a lot of the Tolliver character. I think they could have done so much more with him in season 4. But I thought they were going to set him up as a rival at some point to Swearengen, and they were going to vie for control or something. But never. That character kind of fizzled out. The whole there were some threads that they could have explored more.
Yeah. Well, what about the way they handled romance? I like the fact that I thought at the beginning they're going to make Alma and Seth eventually be together.
I thought so
that
too.
Like Martha was going to run away or something, or like realize that she couldn't stand the way of love, but like that's not realistic. Like like the realistic thing is like people get used to each other and like they don't get divorced willy nilly and like run off with their lovers at that time. So especially not the Seth and the Alma, and even like at the end where the movie where it comes back, they handle it very well, where sort of Alma is still sort of infatuated with him, but she hasn't married. It doesn't appear she's ever married, but Seth has and has moved on with the kids, and she's trying to sort of hint at like rekindling it or something, and he's just sort of not having it. And I thought that was that was a very unique and interesting and realistic way that they dealt with that.
Yeah, it's hard to know with shows how they're going to, because you could go for like the most dramatic and interesting and what sort of scintillating storyline, which would be that we somehow discover that actually all along Seth has still been Bullock. He's still been cheating on his wife or still been sleeping with Alma. But I think it is a more realistic choice, and so Deadwood overall I think was a more realistic show than a lot of others would have been.
Yeah, I liked all that stuff, and and another thing. By the way, the Swearengen's the real Swearengen's death. Have you guys read anything about how Swearengen died?
No, I didn't.
It's fascinating. So he went off to Denver, and then I think in 1904 he's found dead between railroad tracks, and he's got seems like blunt force object at the back of the head. And it was like it could have been like somebody could have killed him, or they say he could have like tried to hitch a ride on a train and like fallen off and hit his head or something. But it was basically it's like a sort of a mysterious sort of gritty death at the end, which is appropriate.
That's fitting.
He had a twin brother too, and someone tried to shoot his brother.
Thinking that it was him
2 months earlier before he died. And so the theory is that maybe somebody was looking for him, and they went to shoot his brother, and they didn't, but then they eventually found him, or maybe it's just all a coincidence. And I don't know. I don't think there's anyone believes that there's any reason that his brother would have gone after him. But it was a very sort of mysterious death. Yeah, he lived another for like 15, like you say, he died at the end of the show. I mean, he lived another 14 years. After the show was over, so he wasn't close to death, and he didn't die natural causes. I mean, he either fell off a crate or was bludgeoned to death.
Yeah, so they had to make him so sickly then in the movie. That's
he wasn't sickly, by the way. Some newspaper got some newspaper. He talked to some newspaper. He claimed he had gone to Canada for there was a gold rush in Canada. He claimed to have gone there. We don't know if he actually went there, but he came back and like the newspaper reported like around 1891, like when this movie was made, that he was looking fine. He was saying he felt healthy and that he was actually looking very good. So it was a conscious effort to sort of make him this sort of withering away alcoholic. It wasn't.
Maybe that was David Milch sort of writing a part of himself into that character, because like his health was fading, right? Like he has Alzheimer's or something. I read a review or something about him, and this was a profile piece, and his health was fading. He's making
in a book. I haven't read it yet, but he wrote a book. He just wrote his memoirs, and so I have it queued up in my Audible. But I'm sure it's great. So
yeah.
I recommend.
Yeah, I'll flip to the Deadwood section and see what he says. Okay, this was fun. Anything else either of you guys want to say before we say goodbye to the Deadwood series? Nope.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. It was fun. All right, guys.
Yeah,
Until next
enjoyed
time.
it.
Okay. Thanks, guys.